this episode of the Jesus Agenda, why is this particular presidential election so important? What is the issue with Christians not voting? And why are people okay with boys playing girls' sports? This is Chad Kyler. I'm joined by my co-host Stephen Mannion, and this is the Jesus Agenda. This is the show where politics, religion, and culture come face to face with Jesus and with his agenda. And I think we're going to jump right into it. Why is this? And we hear this all the time, every 4 years. This is the most consequential election that you're going to have in your lifetime. But it feels like it's a little bit more important to say that this time around than it has been probably the last 20 years.
Yeah.
Why is that? What is at stake with this particular election, do you think?
Yeah, we've been saying that. You're right. We've said that the last... I mean, I can remember saying that with Clinton. People saying that with Clinton, even I was pretty young, right?
Yeah.
But there is something really unique about this election. I really think there's a lot of practical issues at hand, but that's always been true, right? There's always been financial issues at stake. They've had that with Carter, right after Carter administration, where inflation was through the roof. It's the same thing now. Energy costs, it was like that after Carter. Yeah. We have that now. Immigration is a unique practical issue that hasn't really been dealt with in this kind of way. But to me, we are really looking at a moral fork in the road.
Oh, yeah.
And so America's kind of making a decision here. The way I see it is that we're going to choose a culture of life or a culture of death. And right. I don't mean just abortion.
Right, absolutely. And that's a common opinion, apparently, because Gallup did a survey. And this came out in May of this year. And what they found is, for the first time in the history of these surveys, at least, 54% of Americans say that the state of moral values in the U.S. is poor. And 33% say it's fair. 83% believe that U.S. moral values are getting worse.
Yeah.
And of course that changes to, Democrat versus Republican. It's almost 75% of Republicans think things are getting worse. And I'm sure the Democrat number is a lot lower than that. But there's definitely a moral decline in this country. And whenever the left is in charge, the decline seems to become more rapid.
Yeah.
And that happens across a number of different issues. But one of the things that has become such a big talking point, at least in the news media and among the pundits, is crime. Crime has been just increasing all over the place. Every major U.S. city has a serious problem with an increase in crime. And it's funny because if you go back, and even if we take the riots out of the equation from the Trump period, crime on average was going down across the country. Ever since 2020, 2021, crime has been increasing, and it just seems to get worse.
Right.
Doesn't seem to get any better.
Well, I mean, we have a tinderbox in our country right now, right? I mean, there's a lot of things that contribute to that crime numbers. Of course, the Democrats would say it's all because of guns, as if the last couple years is the only years we had guns in our country, as if that's going to solve the issue. I don't think it does. Whenever somebody plows into somebody with a car, we don't try to ban cars, right?
Right.
But if somebody gets in an accident in a car, it's not the car's fault. It's the person driving the car's fault, right? And but there's a lot of aspects, a lot of things feeding into that. But Obama, of course, made our country polarized.
Oh, yeah.
Us versus them. And so that's been growing and growing and growing. And
which the ironic thing about that is it took an awful lot of white people to elect the first black president.
Yeah, right. Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
And yet things became even more divided with him in office. And he was basically a do-nothing president. I mean, he didn't really get any major positive legislation done. The whole thing was
Obamacare.
Right. The whole ACA thing was the big, kind of cornerstone of his administration. But they did get Osama bin Laden. I'll give him that much. And I think there was a concerted effort for that. So we give him credit where credit is due. But as far as the state of the country went, things really didn't get better. Things got worse.
Yes.
And and I'm afraid that Harris has, not just on the moral issues, what we could put right at the top of that is her support, her voiced support for federalizing abortion and getting Congress to, now of course this assumes she has control of Congress, Democrat majorities, and from what I was watching on Real Clear Politics the other day, the polls really are trending towards the GOP retaining the House and picking up a slim majority in the Senate.
But of course, we know what the polls did in the
That's
midterms.
true.
They meant nothing.
That's true. That's
this
true.
big red wave was supposed to happen.
That's true. So it could just, So assuming let's assume she gets elected, she has Congress, she has the Senate. She wants to press them for a law to make abortion federally legal up to birth across the country. That's one issue of continued moral decline. She also would impose new gun laws, particularly against what they call assault rifles, which is interesting, of course, because AR-15s are not assault rifles.
It's just a rifle.
It's a rifle
that has a fancy looking.
It just looks like it's really deadly, right? Like an AR-15 is a 22. I mean, we used to go out with a 22 and hunt rabbits and squirrels when I was a kid. But so she would impose new gun laws. She would increase taxes to 28% on every category. Corporate tax, capital gains has no tax right now, so she would go from 0 to 28% on capital gains tax. The corporate tax, I think, is 21%. Trump says he wants to lower it to 15%. She wants to increase it to 28%. So taking more of your money, costing more jobs with that corporate tax increase. And then her spending plans are insane. Yeah. They're nuts.
Because they use monetary spending theory,
right?
Which is
Keynesian economics.
We can just print it.
Yeah,
it doesn't matter how much we spend. We can continue to rack up our national debt,
which is going to do what?
Just print it. Will cause inflation.
More inflation. Yeah, more inflation. We'll be in bread lines before the 4 years.
Which is why we're in New York, but in other states they increased the minimum wage to $15 an hour. And they increased it saying, oh, now they'll have a livable wage. But now that they've increased the minimum wage to $15 is no longer enough for a livable wage because the cost of everything skyrocketed, which we said would happen.
Sure.
So now you have to increase it to like $25 to be a livable wage, which would just make everything more expensive.
Yeah. Well, and that's, we don't go to fast food as much as we used to, but you go to fast food with 3 people, it's like $60.
Yeah, I know. To get when I was a kid, it was $5 for a meal. Remember?
Oh, it's crazy. Yeah. It's crazy. So just the baseline, and of course they've gotten rid of a lot of their workers. And you go into McDonald's now, they've got a kiosk that they want you to use instead of, and then of course the folks who are actually making decent wages have less of their dollar because everything costs so much money. So I kind of think that's a moral issue myself. I mean, it's not like a 10 Commandments moral issue. In one sense, it is maybe thou shalt not steal, but we could probably get into an argument about whether taxation is theft or not.
I'd like to point something else out. Yeah. Because I've been listening to Democrats, because I always like to listen to what they're saying.
Right.
And they believe this is the biggest election in their lifetime. And the reason that a lot of them give is Trump is Hitler.
Oh, wow.
Right? No, but I'm saying that's their argument. And, but that is extraordinarily dangerous, right?
They're going to get him killed.
They're going to get him killed. So any of you who are listening who are Democrats, we love you. You are made in the image of God, and we love you. But is Trump really Hitler? Like, what evidence do you have to come to that state? Like, how did you get that? What millions did he kill?
Right.
We have Jews at his rallies who are holding Israel flags. I don't see him as being literally Hitler. I would argue that the Democrats, they're not Hitler. No one's Hitler.
No.
But they're closer. Who's the party that's killed 60-something million babies?
Right? Absolutely.
I do not, if you're going to make an accusation that Trump is literally, they said literally Hitler, what's your argument for that? What has he done that's Hitler-esque? Well, he said mean tweets.
Yeah.
Or he's mean to immigrants. No, he just wants them to come legally.
Right. Yeah.
It's just not a fair statement. And I would argue the same thing if a conservative used some blanket said like Kamala Harris is Stalin.
Right.
I'd be like, no, she is not Stalin.
Right.
That's not fair. Right?
Yeah, it's not a fair comparison at all. I don't think you can. And this is not a defense of Trump's personality.
No, he's got his issues.
I was talking to somebody the other day. I said, when you vote for a candidate, I hope, at least, I know for myself, I'm not sending a Valentine to the candidate.
We don't
love everything about a person.
We aren't hiring a pastor.
No,
we're hiring a president and
somebody who's going to enact policy that I think is good. And for me, what's good is what's good for my neighbor. What's going to be the best scenario for my neighbor?
Right.
How can the government serve my neighbor? And of course, my closest neighbors are my family. My wife and my children are my closest family. So, or my closest neighbors. So what's going to serve them? What's going to serve the people in my church? What's going to serve the people in my community and my state, and so on and so forth? So
that's Romans 13.
Yeah, that's what I'm looking for.
Reward good and punish evil.
Reward good and punish evil. I think it's interesting, too, that we talk about inflation. We just lived through some of the highest gas prices ever, right? The last 4 years. And if you've noticed, the last probably month or so, maybe 2 months, prices have gone down. Why is that? That's because the Biden administration has finally lifted red tape and regulation to allow for more drilling and excavation.
Which makes people think it's turning around. So
it's
maybe
not.
It's okay to vote for them.
Right.
Yeah.
It's not turning around. But whose policies did they essentially put back into play? Trump's policies.
Yeah.
Which is why we had lower energy rates. And
we were energy independent whenever Trump left office. We did not depend on other countries for our energy. That is how you want to be. It's not better for the environment to take oil from another country rather than ours. You're still taking oil from the country, all this these batteries and the rare earth mineral mining and the diesel and the slavery or abuse of labor, child labor that's used in harvesting these things and shipping all this stuff. It's all a big scam.
Right.
It's not better for the environment. It's our country, the best thing for our country is to be energy independent.
Get it here and use what we have, because when we're buying from these other countries, we're getting it from Venezuela, which is a dictatorship that treats its people terribly. And the Canadian stuff is dirty, filthy dirty. So what we buy from Canada has to go to Texas to be refined anyway. Mm-hmm. And that causes the cost. So whatever cost savings you get from getting it from Canada, or quote unquote environmental protections that you get from the Canadian source, it's being shipped down to Texas. And the only thing that would have kind of evened that out is the pipeline that they don't want to be built.
Yeah. Instead, we're going to truck it.
With
thousands upon thousands of trucks. That's so much
with
better.
more likely to be environmental damage from this trucking line than from a pipe that has been designed for that purpose. So it's definitely asinine to continue to go the direction that we've been going the last 4 years. And I watched a little bit, and I don't watch a lot of the rallies, at least not in full, but I do try to catch up with what both candidates have been saying. And at the Trump rally at the Madison Square Garden on Saturday, which was the quote-unquote Hitler rally, right? Because the neo-Nazis did that in 1939.
80-something years ago.
Yeah, all dressed in the same uniform, too,
I like to see every performance or something that's been at Madison Square Gardens on this state for the last 80-something years.
Right.
And see if, Billy Graham,
were they saying
he preached there, or, the New York Knicks played there.
Were they saying it was the date, too?
It's the same date, 83 years ago.
Oh, I didn't realize they were saying it was the same date.
Yeah, as if that's some sign.
Okay, I didn't happen
to fall.
I didn't catch that. Yeah. All right, so I must somehow, in all the arguing, I must have missed that particular detail. So, but still, it's ridiculous. There's a lot that goes on at Madison Square Garden, so you kind of got to pick a calendar day that you can fit 20,000 people into. Plus, there were 15,000 people outside. But the main thing
there was more than that. The New York Police, NYPD said there was 19-something thousand inside. Right. And there was 75,000 outside.
75,000.
That's what they said.
I just heard this morning. I don't know if it was CNN or Fox News. It was one of the two. I thought they said 15,000. It was probably CNN. But so what he said when he came out was his first thing he says is, are you better today than you were 4 years ago? That's how Reagan opened a lot of his rallies in the early 80s when he was running against Carter.
There's not one issue like that.
And I think that alone, if Trump wins, is what will ultimately propel him back into the White House, is because people generally realize we're not better off. Mm-hmm. We're not better off. No. And one politician wants to keep us going the same direction. But Trump is not a savior, and we have to be careful, especially as Christians, that we don't put our trust in a political party or a government program or anything like that. We're warned by Psalm 146:3, do not put your trust in princes, in human beings who cannot save. And I found this meme that I reposted a couple days ago or maybe yesterday that I thought was pretty poignant, that basically says, the day after the election, we can still guarantee these results. God will still be on the throne. Jesus will still be King of Kings and Lord of Lords. The Bible will still have all the answers to every problem. The tomb will still be empty. Jesus will still be the only way to heaven. Prayer will still work. The cross, not the government, will still be our salvation. There will still be room at the cross. Jesus will still save anyone who places their faith and trust in him. And God will still be with us always. Amen. So nothing really changes in that direction. We're talking about temporal things, yes, not eternal things. And so the world's not going to end, no matter who we wake up to on Wednesday morning. If we do wake up Wednesday morning knowing the world's not going to end. Not
all of a sudden in the last 3 years, it takes 2 weeks after the election.
I know, it's crazy. And they were talking last night on
my entire life.
Is it going to be one night or 13 days? and I heard somebody say, we used to have election day, now we have election periods.
Yeah. Well, Chad, it takes a long time to count digital votes.
I know, it's crazy, right? Well, it's more like it takes a long time to change digital votes. All right, so we're going to segue out of politics into some jokes. So we decided last week that after we poked fun at Kamala Harris, we would do something a little more fun and poke fun at the two traditions that we represent.
So let's go back and forth.
So we're going to go back and forth. I'll let you go first. Steve's going to do You Might Be a Lutheran If, and I'm going to do You Might Be a Methodist If.
All right. You might be a Lutheran if you consider a trip to Minneapolis to be a pilgrimage.
That could be true. Okay, you might be a Methodist if you think acolytes are some kind of fat-free wafers served during Holy Communion.
That's actually, there's sadly some truth to that. Okay, you might be a Lutheran if the communion cabinet is open to all, but the coffee cabinet is locked up tight.
That's true. You might be a Methodist if you think the upper room is a counseling center for persons hooked on diet pills.
Hey, I have a teaching thing called the upper room. People better not show up for weight loss. Okay, you might be a Lutheran if you think that the Bible forbids crossing the aisle when passing the peace.
Does anybody in your church? No, we do. Our church does cross the aisle, yeah.
Whenever we do our version of passing the peace, it's like everywhere, all over the whole church, and it takes forever, right, DJ? And so last week, yesterday, he said, okay, when you hear the music start playing, everyone go back to your chairs. Yeah. And it was like the music was playing and everybody was still talking, going around, going there. Yeah.
So there's two ways that Lutherans will do it, and some of them, they don't even pass the peace. So if you look in the historic Lutheran liturgy, there was no passing of the peace. That's really a Vatican II thing that was adopted by everybody.
Well, they'd pass a mug of beer instead?
No, what they would do is, it was part of the beer would be a good idea, but what they would do is it was part of the Eucharistic liturgy, but the pastor would just say, peace be with you, and you would say, and also with you, and that was it. And then you would continue on with the Eucharistic liturgy, right? When they started adding this, way of doing the sign of peace, people had to get creative with how to make that work. And it's one of those things, it's kind of like entitlements. Once the government starts spending your money on particular welfare programs, there's no going back. Well, once we added that, 50, 60 years ago, there was no going back. So the way I do it in my church, because they do the same thing, they're all over the place, is we had to put a hymn before communion, which normally wouldn't be
So you
there.
can just start saying.
So we do the peace, and then we say, okay, let's keep standing so we can sing our communion hymn as we prepare
I
for
hate the passing of
Lord's
the peace.
Supper.
I've always hated it. I still do.
I don't mind it.
Yeah, I don't like forced socialization.
Yeah.
Like, okay, right now you have to act like you want to say hi to
Like you
everybody.
like people. But
Yeah.
in my church, they generally do like each other. So, and honestly, that's how they get to know people.
What do you think, DJ? Do you like passing me the peace?
Yeah, I do.
Yeah,
He likes
our
it.
producer likes it.
He likes it.
So
We're gonna have to you got to get a mic for the next episode so we could hear you say something.
Yeah, we'll work on that.
All right, so here's my last one. You might be Methodist if you think Lent is something you brush off your clothes, or something that has to do with allowing your neighbor to use your lawnmower.
yeah, well, it
I
depends
lent him
on
my
the
lawnmower.
church. The old church I was at, we did the full Lent thing, but there are some Methodist churches they don't have any concept of really Lent, But
Yeah.
we did it legit in my church.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
Okay, so we're on politics, now we're moving on to something that has to do with religion, but it's really closely related to our political season, because Barna issued a study that it did with Arizona Christian University, or Arizona State Christian University, something like that. Mm-hmm. They surveyed, the broader group was people of faith, and what they found was that 49 million people of faith are planning not to vote. And within that broad category of people of faith, which could be anybody, Jews, Muslims, Christians, Hindus, whatever, within that group, if we put it all the way down to brass tacks, they found that 32 million Christians who are regular churchgoers, and I believe Barna's definition of regular is at least once a month. Mm-hmm. So 32 million Christians
Out of 49 million.
Well, but the 49 million.
I know, but most
is
of that 49 million is Christians who aren't voting.
Right. Yeah. So
that's pretty.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah.
Right. So 32 out of. Well, no, I don't know that that's right. Would that?
Because
because they would be
million.
inclusive of that number, right?
Yeah.
Okay. So 32 out of the 49. So 32 million are Christians who go to church at least once a month who plan not to vote.
That's sad.
So we have a voting problem, and if you look at it conversely, think of the influence that we would have if those 32 million church-going Christians voted.
You could turn most elections, I believe.
Pretty much any election.
Yeah.
You would be the largest voting bloc in the country, and they didn't break this down denominationally. So this is inclusive of Roman Catholics and Protestants, and probably some groups that don't identify with either group, like not Disciples of Christ, but Church of Christ or something like that.
Congregationalists.
Yeah. So I don't know, how do you even overcome that kind of thing? How do you convince people who are apparently not convinced by their faith that they need to vote?
I've heard a couple. My parents know a guy, and his argument was, well, we got to leave it in the Lord's hands. I mean, to me, that logic is okay. I'll be honest, it's stupid. I mean, there's no other way to say it. Like, I mean, why do you work a job, sir?
Why don't you stay home and pray for a paycheck?
Yeah, why don't you just trust God to provide for your family?
Right,
it's lunacy. I mean, the Lord tells us to be part of society, right? He told the Jews in Babylon to be a functioning, contributing part of Babylon, right? Whenever they're in captivity.
Pray for the city that you're in. Bless the city that you're in.
Yeah, and it's complete nonsense. I'll be honest. I don't know how you battle that. It's a logical problem and a spiritual problem. I see it.
I think too, though, and we have to place some of the blame on the fear that religious leaders and churches have of pointing this out, right? Because we have the Hatch Act, and everybody seems to think that the Hatch Act, which is something that was passed by Congress in the 40s or the 50s, I can't remember if it was President Johnson who signed it into law.
Oh, the Johnson Amendment?
The Johnson Amendment, I'm sorry, not the Hatch Act. The Hatch Act has to do with booze, doesn't it?
I don't know.
Figures the Lutheran would think about that.
Yes.
So the Johnson Amendment, which doesn't prevent us from doing a lot of things that people think it does.
They've never tried to enforce it. It's been
but even if they did,
it would lose.
But it only has to do with endorsing a candidate or a political party.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of stuff you can do that's not a violation of the Johnson Amendment. Issues causes. This is a great example. So right now across the country, well, here in New York, we have Proposition 1, which is on the ballot, and I meant to bring this up in the last segment, but I'm going to bring it up now because I made a couple notes about this.
And a lot of states have similar.
Well, that's what I was going to bring up, is all the states that have something similar. So Proposition 1 is in New York is they want to change the article of our state constitution that has to do with discrimination, which currently says, that a person can't be discriminated against based on race, creed, color, sex.
Which we're great with.
Right? That's perfect. It's wonderful. They want to add a whole bunch of other categories: sexual orientation, age, gender identity, gender expression, all this other kind of stuff that it's because of the ambiguity of the language, there's going to be a ton of lawsuits. But there are the other thing is abortion. It's going to codify abortion as a constitutional right in New York State up to birth. There are 11 other ballot measures that are related to this kind of abortion measure here in New York. Arizona, Colorado, Florida, Maryland, Missouri, Montana, Nebraska, Nevada, South Dakota. Nebraska's is the only one that's a limiting amendment. So theirs would actually limit at what point you can get an abortion. So I think it's first trimester they would limit it at, right? Mm-hmm. So that one's okay. The other 10 are extensively making abortion
more readily available.
Yeah, more readily available and for a longer period of time. So you can advocate for these or against these as a church. Mm-hmm. The pastor can stand up in the pulpit and say, for example, for the last number of weeks.
We have in our church. We've spoken.
Well, yeah, and that's what I've been doing the last number of weeks. I've been getting up and I've been saying, we need to vote against Prop 1. And I've printed out flyers from, advocacy groups here in New York that are targeted at church members. Mm-hmm. This is why we should stand against it. You need to let your relatives know. This is something that's going to affect religious freedom. It's going to affect the unborn. It's going to affect girls who play sports. There's so many things. So issue ballot measure campaigns, there's no limit on what the church
and just do. Encouraging people to vote, obviously.
There's nothing wrong with that.
Yeah.
Get out and vote. And remember, it only comes up this is how I think about it. It only comes up when conservatives are the ones who want to do it.
Yeah.
Because the Democratic candidates make their church rounds every year. Kamala Harris was just speaking at some major Black Baptist church or Black Methodist church or something down south.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that was fine.
Yeah.
And that was fine. But as soon as
there wasn't any call for separation of church and state.
No, absolutely not.
On that occasion.
No.
It really comes down to, I believe, the church and especially pastors, pulling an Esau deal. Selling your birthright for some momentary comfort.
Right.
And we've been given this freedom of this country. It's been passed on to us. Heck, my grandfather, fought in World War II. My great grandpa fought in World War I. I think most of us have somebody in our family who fought in some sort of war. Yeah. For these freedoms and for life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And we're just kind of giving it away because we don't want to offend anybody. Right?
Yeah. Yeah. Don't get political.
Yeah.
That's kind of it. And look, there is a right way of doing it and a wrong way of doing it.
Sure.
Right? And I think we've already kind of said the right way is to understand that this is, God rules the world from two perspectives or two kingdoms. This is something that Luther taught. He has the kingdom of the right hand, that's the church. That's the spiritual kingdom.
Augustine said the same thing.
And
the kingdom of God.
Right. And then there's the kingdom of the left. Or for Augustine it was the city of God and the city of man. Yeah. But for Luther, it's God is ruling through the kingdom of the left hand, which is the government, it's politicians, it's the military, it's secular authorities. But God is using them, and you already pointed out, Romans 13, he's using them to punish vice and wickedness and to uphold the good and take care of the good. That's what government is God's minister for, to do those things. And then the church is the spiritual kingdom, or the spiritual kingdom. The church operates the spiritual kingdom, so to speak, right? So that's the gospel. That's the sacraments. That's the preaching and the And some would even say that's the feeding the poor and helping the naked and all that kind of stuff, right? So we, as Christians, we have a vocation in both kingdoms.
Yes.
And one of the vocations in the left-hand kingdom is to be a good citizen and to do our civic duty.
Yes.
And I think what is combined with that, in the right-hand kingdom, as Christians, we have an obligation to our neighbor. Mm-hmm. We have to serve our neighbor.
Yeah.
And this civic duty and serving our neighbor go hand in hand. Mm-hmm. Because what you vote for and who you vote for is going to directly affect your neighbor, for good or for bad.
Yes.
So there's an imperative there, I think.
And I think that's why we both saw an article talking about Archbishop, I don't know how you say his last name, Vigano, maybe? I'm not Italian.
It sounds right.
It may be. It
sounds right with that.
And he was talking about that, what you just said, about how it's going to, who's going to be in office does affect our neighbor. And so we have an obligation as Christians to vote for the person, for the individual that will best, benefit, punish good, reward good, and punish evil.
Right.
And he said in this article, Archbishop Vigano, he says, to abstain from voting would not be morally possible, since in this war, declaring oneself neutral means allying oneself with the enemy. And you mentioned the relation to this with Bonhoeffer.
Yeah.
Did you mention that?
And I want to share that quote, but that's especially poignant right now because we've had all these accusations about somebody being Hitler, through this election cycle. And here's a guy that actually faced Hitler. Mm-hmm. And for those who don't know, Bonhoeffer was a Lutheran pastor.
He was a beast of history, man.
Yeah, he absolutely was. If you want to, honestly, next to...
one of my heroes.
Yeah, and I think he's kind of like a C.S. Lewis figure, right? Yeah. For the Anglicans, a lot of people love C.S. Lewis across the board. In fact, I usually credit C.S. Lewis's Mere Christianity with helping me come back to the faith when I had kind of wandered away, at least as the initial step. And Bonhoeffer is kind of like a Lutheran C.S. Lewis, not so much because, although his theology is great, and if you're going to read him, read Christ the Center before you read anything else. But Bonhoeffer, because of the kind of life he lived and what he did and his theology and practice, right? So here's a guy that was a pastor, and when the whole German church was essentially going along with Nazism, in fact, the Nazis had renamed the church the Reichskirche, and they took down crosses and put up swastikas, and there's even a point in that history where they took the Gospels out and put Mein Kampf in the pulpit. I mean, this is insane stuff, man.
And he called this stuff out.
And he called it out right from the beginning. And then they used it. Well, yeah, but and the people that were kind of in authority, who were even on his side in the German church, were afraid to really kind of follow suit because, like you said, they had this position of comfort or they just didn't want to die. And Bonhoeffer was throwing caution to the wind. He's like, no, we can't do this. We're talking about the life and death of the church.
Yeah.
So he ended up being a spy, and then he was part of an assassination attempt.
By the way, watch the movie. What's it called?
I was just going to say, the movie's coming out.
Spy
It's
Assassin.
called Bonhoeffer, Pastor, Spy, Assassin.
You have to see it.
You got to see it. It comes out actually the week before Thanksgiving, I think, the Thursday. So that's the 22nd or the 21st. But then it'll be playing all week through Thanksgiving week. And this is another movie that's been produced by Angel Studios. And I've heard people, and I know I'm getting off the track a little bit here, but I do want to kind of give a little plug because I've heard some Christians say, don't support Angel Studios because it's owned by Mormons. Well, here's the deal, guys.
Which it is.
We're not agreeing with Mormon theology by supporting good products that they create.
Yeah,
that's just stupid.
Right.
There's nothing in any of the movies, and so far I've watched Cabrini. I'm not Roman Catholic. I loved the movie. It was great. Yeah. And honestly, I have a real deep respect for Mother Cabrini now and what she did because I can see her being the hands and feet of Christ. And that's okay with me, right?
Yeah.
And I can recognize that a Mormon family that owns, because they share the same kind of moral values that we have, and they don't want to see smut all the time. They want their families to be able to watch good movies. So don't be afraid to support stuff that's done by Angel Studios. In fact, get the app if you can. Support them even more.
You aren't going to watch Bonhoeffer and hear Mormon theology.
Yeah, right. And just because the production company is Angel Studios doesn't mean the directors and the people making the movie are Mormons.
Yeah.
That's just who owns it. So don't be afraid to do it. But anyway, Bonhoeffer said, silence in the face of evil itself. Bonhoeffer said, silence in the face of evil is evil itself. Mm-hmm. And then he had this warning, God will not hold us guiltless. Not to speak is to speak. Not to act is to act.
Not to vote is to vote.
Not to vote is to vote. If you don't vote, I actually heard it put really well, and it's a common sentiment by somebody who's a friend with me on Facebook. They said, if you don't vote, you have no opinion. Mm-hmm. But I would take it a step further. If you vote, if you don't vote, you've let us know what your opinion is.
And if you don't vote, don't whine the next 4 years. I
don't
want to hear you say
complain.
a thing.
I don't want to hear you say it. That's right. That's right. I want to see if you don't have an I voted sticker somewhere on your Facebook profile because you walked out. So speaking of that, early voting is going on in most of the country right now, and the turnout right now is huge. Like Georgia, there's over 2 million as of yesterday. I heard over 2 million people have voted early already. That's huge. That's really, really large numbers. Mm-hmm. Now, historically, early voting was opposed by Republicans, and it usually benefits Democrats. But since Laura Trump got involved with the RNC, for like the last year, they've been pushing it. And part of their theory is we can make it too big to rig, right? If we get this many votes out this early, then it's a sign that election day will be even bigger.
Yeah.
And so there'll be just too many votes. There's no way you'd be able to rig it in a particular way. But I did hear, and now this is just a little speculation, I did hear somebody mention, one of the news commentators say, asking somebody who was talking about the battleground states and where the polls are putting things. And we can say, we don't really trust it. And polls are wrong a lot of times. But polling, there are polls that are really good polls, right? But this guy said that, is it possible that this surge of popularity for Trump becomes basically a win in the popular vote, but a loss in the Electoral College, which happens a lot of times for Democrat candidates.
Because we aren't a democracy. We are a
right,
republic.
We're a republic. Yeah. So, and the guy said, of course that's a possibility. He didn't seem to think so, because he was looking at the trends in the 7 battleground states, and they all seem to be right now trending towards Trump. So some of the things I think that were beneficial from the previous Trump administration that would continue to be beneficial. Think about, for example, we're going to talk about this in just a second, but let's think about the Title IX changes that Biden pushed through the new rules. Now, they didn't get to the letting transgender students play in women's sports yet. That'll probably come after November if they win in November. But they did change some of the rules to sort of set it up. But during the Trump era, Congress was working on, and then they later put a bill together in 2023 when the Republicans took over, to have a bill that says, look, if you're going to play in women's sports, you have to be biologically a woman. Mm-hmm. So that kind of thing could be protected under a Trump administration, a new Trump administration. Mm-hmm. Taxes were obviously lower. We were talking about this offline, that there was a direct correlation in church giving with when people were spending less, when inflation was lower, when taxes were lower and the tax rate didn't go higher. So this affects everybody. It affects nonprofits' ability to do the work they do, not just churches, but just in general. And it affects what you can do for your family. So I think my personal opinion is that a Trump presidency would be better all around. It would be a reprieve, probably not.
That is a correct personal opinion.
I'm going to record you saying that again, and then every time my wife disagrees with me, I'm just going to play Steve saying that is a correct personal opinion. Yeah. I don't know if that's going to work, but probably not. But anyway. So listen, if you want to sponsor us to participate, to continue these shenanigans, rather, of this podcast that we're starting and growing, if you have a church or maybe a parachurch ministry or a nonprofit that you operate in the community, or if you're a Christian-owned business and you want to sponsor an episode, you can do that by giving us $20. It's really low right now because that's what it costs us to produce, thanks to our wonderful producer, DJ. So if you want to sponsor one of our episodes, you can email us at the JesusAgendaPodcast@gmail.com. Send us your copy, like what you want us to say about your business or your ministry, and we will plug it here before we get to the last segment, and we'll tell you where you can send your $20 check. So contact us there, JesusAgendaPodcast@gmail.com. So now we're going to transition. Do you like how I said that?
Oh, yes. I get it now.
It took a minute. So now we're going to transition into boys playing girl sports or men playing girl sports. And we could probably talk about bathrooms too, just because I'd like to resurrect that.
Just for the record, if my wife is in a bathroom, I'm sorry, but no trans person is walking into that bathroom.
I agree with you.
Nope.
And I know there was
it's a man walking into the woman's bathroom.
Oh, absolutely.
My wife's in there.
Absolutely. How about if you've got young daughters in there?
Yep.
You know, I can't even imagine what that
DJ, would you let someone, when Gia's in the bathroom, would you let a transgender person walk in there?
They can go in, they just won't come out.
They can go in, but they won't come out, he said.
They just won't come out. So what's been in the news lately is this volleyball situation, right, with San Jose State.
Yeah.
They've got this young man who's transitioning, is transgender and identifies as a woman, has been playing for them for a little bit now, and you can clearly, if you watch the tape, by the way, this guy like eviscerates even the best of the female opponents on the opposing teams.
Yeah.
And so some of these college volleyball teams, these women's teams, are refusing to play. They're just taking the forfeit.
Because it isn't safe.
Yeah, well, of course it's not safe.
Yeah.
I saw one video where, now, I believe that the net is lower, I would assume, right? Because
I don't know.
Women are shorter than men, so I would assume the net is a little bit lower than... does anybody know anything about women's basketball? Is the women's basketball hoop
DJ,
shorter than
are you
men?
going to look that up for us, DJ?
Can you look that up?
Okay.
Yeah.
We'll get back to you guys.
Yeah, because I think the net is shorter, and this guy's got definitely vertical leap that whether the net is shorter or not, he has a higher vertical jump. He can go higher than the girls can.
Oh, yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And I watched a video where he slams this girl right in the face with
Did she get knocked out?
I don't know if I don't think she was unconscious.
Bleeding or something.
But she was bleeding.
Yeah.
Or maybe her face was red. She might not even been bleeding.
There was something more serious than red.
But she got hit hard.
Yeah.
And it took her a little bit to get up. And the two girls who were being interviewed, I want to say they played for University of Virginia, but it's been a couple weeks, so I'm not... And I didn't bother to look up to see exactly which... Let me see. I actually did pull up some San Jose stuff, but I don't know if I picked the one. I think it was Virginia, and they were explaining why they were going to sit out.
Yeah, there was numerous ones who have forfeited.
Oh, there's a bunch of them.
And the only way you're going to stop this as ladies is if you all forfeit when you're about to play a man.
Yeah, so
otherwise this is just going to continue.
So here's a native of Hawaii who's forfeiting against San Jose State volleyball. The guy who's playing as a girl is named Brooke Slusser. San Jose State University volleyball.
We have the net.
The nets are all the same height.
They are the same height. Okay. So it's just an issue that he has a higher vertical jump.
And stronger. And yeah.
Right, yeah. The biology is what it boils down to. He's stronger. He is able to do more. He's able to be more physical than the girl. So you've got Nevada has forfeited. Alabama is joining a lawsuit over this.
Good.
That has been brought out. But this is not just volleyball. This just seems to be the latest iteration of this. Mm-hmm. This has been going on. I saw a video, I think about 6 months ago, of a female college rugby game, and one of the players was a male.
Rugby's a very physical sport.
And it showed this guy like slamming these girls, like slamming them. I mean, there's just...
That's wrong.
You can't get away from this. You can't get... And I know people that are on the left who disagree with this, and they think it's just stupid. because you literally have to be blind to physiology.
Yeah.
You have to be
ignoring the science, as they like to say.
Yeah, well,
Yeah,
that only has to do when they want to jab you with something.
I was looking at some basic facts about, we shouldn't have to tell you that men and women are different, but unfortunately in this world we have to. Of course, the hormones are completely different.
Just reminds me of Kindergarten Cop. Boys have a penis, girls have a vagina.
Yeah, that's what the difference was. Right. Men are 50% stronger in the top half of their body, generally, 30% stronger in their lower body. The female skeleton is generally less dense, thinner, and smoother. If you want to see something interesting, and DJ, our producer, by the way, went to school to be a surgeon. But if you want to see something interesting, look at a woman's pelvis and a man's pelvis.
Right.
They are very different.
Oh yeah.
The males typically have a larger trachea and bronchi and greater lung volume per body mass. They have larger hearts, 10% higher red blood cell counts, higher hemoglobin, which is why higher hemoglobin and oxygen carrying capacities, right? So endurance and running. And we have a higher circulating clotting factors, which is why men have heart attacks more often than women, but there's benefits to that, right? And it's just to give you an example of how ridiculous this is, and how drastically different men and women are. The U.S. women's Olympic soccer team, get this, played high school under 15 boys team.
Yep.
Okay, under 15 boys team played by the Olympic women's soccer team.
Wait. The world champion
Olympic soccer team, and the boys won 5-2.
Yeah, absolutely.
High school boys under 15.
Absolutely, sure.
So sure. It's just complete. It's just lunacy.
And what kills me is that feminists aren't leading the charge against
I know. They should be. They should be.
They become so feminist that they've voted themselves out of their own position.
Yeah.
Because
right.
now men are. Men are winning Woman of the Year awards.
How, ladies, can
isn't
you
that
not
insane?
be irate about that?
How all the rest of the stuff, like I think we kind of talked about this once privately. Like I can kind of see the arguments for certain things, right? But I can't see the argument for this. I just don't get it.
It's illogical.
You have to have a mental illness to, one, think that you are the opposite of what you are biologically. And to two, think that there really is a spectrum that people can fall on. That gender, which is a made-up word, by the way. Gender is something they just started using like in the 50s and 60s.
It's sex.
It was always sex. It was always sex. But to think that there's some spectrum of gender that you can fall on, because 1 week, your little boy wants to dress like Barbie, doesn't mean that he's a girl.
Yeah.
It means that, maybe he's got two sisters, or maybe the babysitter has a daughter that he's keen on at 5 years old, and she wants to play with Barbies. So to get her to play with him, he wants to dress like Barbie. You don't know what the motivating factor is, but to buy into this stuff, you have to be deranged, and it kind of makes me think of that. Who used to say, was it Rush Limbaugh used to say that liberalism is a mental disorder?
Yeah, it was Rush Limbaugh.
And but you're seeing it play out. Yeah. You're seeing it play, and the funny thing about it is that old school liberals are agreeing. Like Bill Maher. I don't know if you've watched any of Bill Maher's stuff.
Bill Maher.
Bill Maher's
like, sees the lunacy.
You people are freaking nuts.
Yeah, and he's progressive.
Oh yeah, but I would say he's like a Clinton liberal. He's more
right.
I wouldn't say like he's a socialist or anything like that.
The modern progressives, a lot of them have ignored reality.
Well, absolutely.
Because someone feels a certain way, we're going to lop off body parts and pump them full of hormones.
Right.
Think about that for a second.
There was a I think it was the Daily Wire the other day had something up about this boy a few years ago where the mom came out and said that the kid was 5 years old or 4 years old and was transgender. And this was all over the news. I didn't recognize it, but I followed the Daily Wire story, and now this kid is 17 and saying, I don't want to do this anymore.
Yeah. Well, you know what? I used to think I was Superman when I was a kid. Yeah. Good thing my mom and dad didn't throw me off my house.
Yeah. Right. It's a good thing they told you to get down, right? And not go through with it.
I'm sorry, people. It's ridiculous.
It is ridiculous. It is ridiculous. And again, I think the feminists are hurting themselves by supporting this.
Yeah.
And by and large, that's who's supporting it, is quote unquote feminists. Now, I was going to reach out to, we have Feminists Choosing Life, which I think is a national group, but we have a New York State chapter. And Steve and I both met the executive director there, and I meant to reach out to her this week to get a quote from her.
She's like a true feminist, like
she
an
really
old
is,
school feminist,
old
like
school
what
feminist.
they used to be, yeah.
And I didn't get a quote from her, but I know that based on what their website talks about, that they're not for the replacement of women. So they're not for the replacement of women, which is probably the quote that maybe we would get. I don't support the replacement of women
with confused men
by men. And look, it doesn't take a science degree to know. It really doesn't. I mean, basic biology tells us what the genetic makeup is of a man and what the genetic makeup is of a woman. You just ran down a bunch of physiological differences that are clear as day. I mean, clear as day. And maybe with the exception of some really small statured men who already have kind of feminine features, it would be very difficult for somebody dressed in drag to not be spotted as a man.
But even then, on the cellular structure, you can tell if they're male or female.
Yeah, oh yeah, absolutely. Yeah, so, even if the eyes can be fooled, if you did a DNA sample or a blood sample or something like that, you would know.
Yeah, there are exceptions, obviously.
Well, sure.
There's some women that could beat me up.
Yeah, and we talked. Like Ronda Rousey could kick my butt. Absolutely. But we talked about that a little bit with those two Olympic boxers, right? They're the exception to the rule. The exception. You don't create a rule out of the exception. You don't, even when we were talking about the abortion debate, not to rehash it, but just because we have these propositions all over the country that are seeking to expand abortion availability, but to sort of codify it in their state constitutions, rape and incest are so insignificant, they just don't register.
Right.
That's the exception. You don't make a rule out of the exception.
Which is what they say. Well, it should be okay because of rape and incest.
Yeah.
It's like, okay, I mean, I'm against rape and incest abortions, but if you want to draw that line, if we want to make it that, okay, I'll go for it.
Yeah.
Because that would be a great place to put it. Right?
Yeah, absolutely.
And but they wouldn't want that, would they?
No.
Okay, let's all agree right now.
Let's all agree. No abortions except for that.
Rape and incest.
That's going to be our campaign. We're going to campaign on that.
Yeah.
Since everybody wants to talk about this, next year, Steve and I are campaigning on that abortion plague. We outlaw all of it except for rape and incest. And you all should support us.
But
whether you're
they would
Republican,
not go for that.
No, of course they wouldn't, because it's less than 1% of the whole number of abortions that are done. Because I think common sense is that even if rape numbers are higher, right, which I'm sure they're higher than 1%, but then you've got to figure out what's the percentage that result in a pregnancy. But let's say that's 10%.
And the incest ones would be rape, right? Because unless it's like a willing incest, which that's kind of on you if you got pregnant that way,
right?
Purpose.
Like West Virginia.
Yeah, but if it's like
if you're listening to West Virginia, I'm sorry.
Yeah, but if you were like sexually molested, that's rape.
But honestly, it is your own fault.
Yeah. We've all seen. I've seen the documentary Deliverance.
That's right. The documentary Deliverance. But no, yeah. So I guess the reason why they separate it is because incest adds a level of disgust to it, right?
Yeah.
And it is, at least in what I saw cited from the Guttmacher Institute, they do separate it. Now, here's what's kind of muddies up the water a little bit is that there is no requirement to report abortion numbers. So abortion numbers basically come from Planned Parenthood because they're the largest provider in the country. So you got to figure, when they do these statistical polls or when they put data together like this, they're making an average, right? And if the largest provider is saying this is the number, then that's probably the number with the smaller providers too, because it just doesn't make any sense that it would go, in a different direction. But I have heard people argue, well, you can't really say that. Well, look, I didn't come up with the numbers. The Guttmacher Institute did, and they're pro-abortion, super pro.
And it doesn't count chemical.
You're right. It doesn't count chemical abortions. So it is super important to get out and vote. It is probably really important for Christians to get out and vote. And I hope if you're one of the 32 million regular church-going believers in Jesus that was planning on staying home election day, that you change course and change your mind and go out and vote for what is best for your neighbor. Mm-hmm. Vote for what will serve your neighbor best, and your
according to what the Bible says is best for your neighbor.
Right, absolutely. Not
what Kamala Harris says is best for your neighbor.
Not what man says is best, but what does Scripture say? And just to kind of end this segment on the transgender issue, we talk about Genesis, the Genesis account, God creating male and female. But what did Jesus say? Jesus said in Matthew 19, verse 4, when he was asked actually a question about marriage, and he said, "Haven't you read the Scriptures?" Jesus replied.
Which was kind of a dig, by the way.
Yeah, it's kind of a dig, because these are the religious leaders, right? Haven't you read the Scriptures? They record that from the beginning, God made them male and female. So Jesus tells us two things here. First,
but what if God messed up?
What if God messed up, right? Well, that was our deficient Lutheran pastor last week, right? Here Jesus is actually telling you two things. The one thing he's telling you is if you want to know what Jesus thinks about any particular subject, you should read the Scriptures.
Yeah.
Don't sit in your room and say, "Jesus, this is how I feel. Tell me what you think of how I feel." Just read the Scriptures. That's the first thing. And then second thing, on this particular issue, this is what Jesus feels. God made them male and female.
And you are fearfully and wonderfully made, and God didn't mess up when he made you the sex that you are.
Absolutely not. Absolutely not. So I've had a really good time. This is our second episode. We just want this to grow, so we encourage you to come back if you enjoyed our conversation today about the political situations here in the U.S. and what we can do about it as Christians. If you enjoyed our jokes at each other's traditions, we'll have more stuff kind of like that, but we won't always harp on being Methodist or Lutheran, of course. We'll go after other people like the Baptists and the Pentecostals.
Especially Presbyterians.
And especially Presbyterians. We can both agree on that one.
Just kidding, Presbyterians. We love you.
And about this, the transgender issue and just the general problems that we're seeing in our culture with up being down and down being up. And as the prophet said, with right being wrong, with a generation that calls right wrong and wrong right, then we want you to like our Facebook page. We want you to subscribe to our YouTube page. And we want you to share this. Share this on your social media accounts. Send an email to a friend. Make a copy of this episode and send
5-star rating on iTunes.
Yeah, absolutely. You can listen on Apple Podcasts, iTunes. You can listen on Podbean, on Buzzsprout, on Amazon Music. We're pretty much in all of the libraries at this point. Thank you for listening again, and we'll see you next week. God bless.